Woody is an all-around pretty solid character, and nobody is ever really going to complain about Woody for the most part, so let's find out why that might be. Woody starts off with Lucy the Axe, which has an infinite durability, and will take over flint and gold axes if Woody is trying to use those. This is pretty useful early game since Woody just gets a free tool that's going to be useful throughout the entire playthrough, right off the bat. There are tons of other smaller perks that base form Woody has, like a small bit of insulation due to his beard, the ability to hire mobs for more times than other characters would be able to, and his increased chances of spawning tree guards when he's chopping trees. Base form Woody is basically just what you're going to sit at for most of the playthrough, but the small perks here and there that he does have only help to boost his survivability, and he doesn't really have anything that detracts from it. Woody has a couple forms that he could alternate between with varying degrees of quality between them. Starting off with Werebeaver, this is the classic Woody transformation. It's the resource gathering form of Woody with extra emphasis being put on his ability to gather wood. When Woody is in this form, he can't spawn tree guards either, which is either a good or a bad thing depending on how much you need wood versus how much you need living logs. Werebeaver isn't particularly great at harvesting things quickly when compared to other characters, but he more than makes up for it in the ability to preserve resources and gathering resources. So, you know, what that means is basically just saves the gold and the flint that would be required in crafting shovels and pickaxes. This is a pretty good option throughout most of the game, but it really shines early on when you don't have as many resources as you would like. Weremoose is his combat-oriented option, and it does that job fairly well. Weremoose's most appealing factor is the fact that it's so incredibly cheap for how much of a boon it is to the player. Weremoose has the option of charging enemies in an AoE charge attack, and he has the ability to focus on one target for what is essentially handbat damage, and then some. He also has built-in football helmet damage resistance, and all of this is for the low price of some grass and monster meat to make the Weremoose a solid powerhouse. Goose is primarily meant to be a traversal option with a large increase in speed and the ability to traverse the ocean. This is pretty solid when you're starting out a world, but its utility tends to fall off pretty quickly once you have most of the world explored and once you get your base and resources situated, which end up making the exploration bit a bit irrelevant. Woody also has the downside where he's forced to turn into one of these transformations every full moon, which makes him very annoying for any Wickerbottom players that would like to have a full moon up every time. And it makes him very annoying to play as once you get to the Moonstorm events, because then he's just forced to be transformed basically every single night. Luckily for Woody, his skill tree comes in to fix a lot of these problems that he has. That being said, I do think Woody's skill tree is a pretty interesting one that I'm a bit conflicted about, all things considered, but I'll get into why in particular later. Woody's skill tree is divided into a couple of categories. The curse category is all about Woody's transformations, and it includes the transformation timer, which just increases the amount of time Woody spends in his were forms. The curse embracer, which makes Woody not take any damage penalties from eating the kitschy idols, as well as letting him keep hunger after he turns back. This category is pretty good, since it just extends how much you can use the skills each form gives, and Curse Embracer just removes all the downsides of transforming, which, in my opinion, is a necessity. Werebeaver 1 through 3 makes his Werebeaver form chop and mine things faster, with Werebeaver Mastery allowing Woody to smack the ground with his tail, which destroys everything around him, similar to the Thumper in Don't Starve. You know, Werebeaver is fine, it's just, you know, an option for harvesting. There's not really much to say about it other than that. You know, it's an option that is better than what other characters on average tend to have, so it's not really something that you should overlook, but it's not something that you should pour all of your points into, in my opinion at least. That being said, his ability to slam his tail into the ground to destroy everything is pretty solid. Weremoose 1 makes Woody more resistant to bonking into things while he's charging, as well as giving him a general movement speed increase while he's in Weremoose form. Weremoose 2 grants slow health regen to Woody while in his Weremoose form, and Weremoose 3 allows Woody to stop mid-charge. Weremoose Mastery grants a defense against planar damage, as well as a 3-hit combo, where on the 3rd hit, he will deal a small little bit of AoE damage in planar damage. Weremoose is easily the coolest one, in my opinion, and it's quite possibly the best one depending on what you go for. It's incredibly useful throughout the game since it's at worst an AoE option for farming things like spiders and spelunkies, or whatever you're trying to farm a lot of. And at best, it's an option in your bag of tricks that you could fall back on. Goose 1 allows Woody to run faster while he's in Goose form. Goose 2 makes him waterproof. Goose 3 gives Woody the chance to dodge an attack while he's in his Goose form. And Goose Mastery gives him the ability to teleport to a random location via flying. Goose is good in the first couple of days, in my opinion, but I don't really think it's that great after that, all things considered. This is definitely one of the more niche options that Woody has, since a lot of the times in endgame, you're usually going back and forth between 1 or 2 locations, and usually that trip isn't enough to warrant you transforming into a goose. Lumberjack is his next category of perks, with quite a few different things at his disposal. Quick Picker 1 through 3 makes Woody pick things just a bit faster for each one. Tree Guard Feller 1 through 2 makes Woody deal more damage to tree guards. And Tree Guard Feller 3 allows Woody to make a burnable effigy, which just causes tree guards to spawn when you're near trees. These are all pretty alright, with Quick Picker just being alright throughout the game. You know, it's just basically another speed boost in a different form, since you're always going to be gathering things throughout the entirety of the game. And Tree Guard Feller 1 through 2 are pretty alright, since those are just damage ups against tree guards, which means you're going to have to deal with them for a shorter amount of time each time you have to deal with one. Tree Guard Feller 3 just lets you force farm living logs, which is nice, but usually the problem is using up all the living logs that you get, rather than needing more. You can use it to farm bosses and enemies, however, which is pretty nice, but I don't think that this is going to be worth all of the skill tree point investment. Woodworker is next up, and it lets you carve boards more efficiently while you have Lucy in your inventory. This skill is just pretty alright if you're trying to preserve wood, and you know, that's a good option early on, but it falls off incredibly quickly once you start getting a tree farm set up. Hat carving lets you carve a hardwood hat, which is kind of whatever for the most part. It's incredibly cheap, which is the biggest appeal, but it does provide less defense than something like a football helmet. On the other side, it does prevent damage from cave-ins and things that fall on you while you're in the cave during cave-ins. So that's pretty alright, I guess. It's not going to do anything against antlions boulders, and, you know, I think that goes without saying. But the smaller bits and pieces here, like the flint and the rocks, just being able to ignore that is pretty nice. The real big skill that people kind of were freaking out about when this whole skill tree got released is the cane carving, which just lets Woody carve a wooden walking stick, which is just a movement speed increase. The wooden walking stick is basically a budget cane, which is really good early on, since you could just hand this out to everybody on your team starting at day 1. This is going to drastically shorten the amount of time that it takes to explore the entire map and for you to get situated. This can be a good item for you as soon as day 1 and as late as your 2nd year. This does depend on your RNG for the most part though, since getting a walking cane is just better than the walking stick in every way, shape, and form. But the issue is that triple Mac Tusk are still not guaranteed, which means that in worlds with 1 Mac Tusk, people are probably going to end up missing out on a walking cane here and there, depending on the size of your server. So having an alternative to that is really nice. As far as his affinity perks go, you know, let's be real, he only has 1, but for the sake of thoroughly dissecting the character, we'll cover both. Shadow Wrangler makes nightmare creatures passive towards Woody while in his Wermoose form, which is alright. I don't think this is the biggest deal for the most part. I think being able to ignore nightmare creatures if you're constantly going into his were forms for whatever reason is a good option. But the issue is, most of the time you end up staying as base form Woody throughout most of your playthrough, only really turning whenever you would want to or being forced to in the full moon. Which brings me to the next skill, Lunar Renegade, which just prevents full moons from forcing the were transformations entirely. This is easily the one that people default to. Not being forced to turn into a were form is really solid, since in late game, it does make him substantially better, since a big issue that Woody had in late games were that he would constantly be transforming every single night because most people just leave full moons on. So if you're Woody, that would be a huge issue because you would constantly be going insane, you would constantly be draining your hunger, and you would constantly be stuck in a form that basically can't interact with the world in the same way that base form Woody can. And while the skill tree overall does make him substantially better, it has one big issue, which is the aforementioned Lunar Renegade. you know, I did sing the praises of it being one of the best and it becomes almost a necessity, all that fun stuff. But the issue is, if you're starting out as a Woodie in a server, or you're going through Celestial Champions route for the first time as Woodie, then you're going to be miserable throughout the entire process. Because it's locked behind Celestial Champion, it's going to be an option that a lot of players just can't get to, but it would benefit basically everyone from having in default. Unfortunately, the best advice that I can give is just go into the world, console command it in, and like just insta-kill, just enable one-hit kill mode on Celestial Champion and punch him. Like, it's not really a solid solution to the problem, but it's one that I've seen come up pretty often. And it's very unfortunate, but, you know, I just don't really have any elegant solutions other than just cheat the skill in if you're a new player starting out, which feels like such a bad thing to say, you know? Like, I don't like that it is how it is, but there have been so many scenarios in which I or somebody else has been a wicker bottom spamming full moons in a server, and then a Woodie joins, and all of a sudden the full moons that people have come to rely on, whether that is to farm werepigs or whether that is as a light source, ends up being a hindrance to this one player. And it always feels bad to just single out this one player as the cause of, like, oh, this is why nobody else is benefiting from it, you know? It just feels bad. It's just something that feels bad. I don't really have any good solutions to it. I'm just kind of complaining about it at this point, but I digress. You know, that one problem aside though, Woodie is a pretty solid character in most stages of the game. You know, his beaver form has its uses here and there, and his weremoose form definitely has its uses here and there, you know, it's pretty solid. His weregoose is the only thing that's lacking in my opinion, but the fact that he has two other good forms is enough for him, I would say. I don't really know how you would make the goose better, but you know, that's not the point of this video. But ultimately, Woodie has a lot of different options that he can choose from in order to benefit the whole team throughout the entirety of the game. Whether that's sitting at base helping gather resources, which he does pretty good, or going out and farming things like spiders that really another character would be able to do, such as Wendy. But the fact that he's able to alternate between those tasks make Woodie a pretty solid option if you're limited on character choices. Ultimately though, if you're gonna pick Woodie, just be sure to try to do what you can in order to make yourself useful. Whether that be joining somebody farming spiders, whether that be passively chopping wood, whether that be trying not to make turning into a whatever a problem for everybody. There's definitely a lot of things you can do as Woodie. Well, that's all I really wanted to talk about when it came to him. Definitely let me know whether or not you guys think my opinions on the character are valid, or whether or not you guys, you know, have any general advice, general guidelines on how you would be a beneficial Woodie for the team, you know, other than like the basics that I've covered. But yeah, well, that's all I really wanted to talk about when it came to him. So until next time, bye-bye.